Good morning. I'm switching things around here. Welcome to Unity South Central Region's Business Mastermind. This is the class for November, and our beginning meeting in November was kind of sideswiped a little bit by the annual meeting. So we decided to take it off the agenda since you would have a full afternoon that day and to do something a little different. So I am bringing the class part of our normal gathering into our second meeting so that we don't miss what was planned. And then if you have interest or time and would like to have more conversation at the end, I'll turn off the recording and we can take a little time to check in. In the meantime, I'm going to launch right into our subject, which for tonight is, or for this afternoon, is storytelling. And I know that we all got a little training in storytelling and we all know a little bit about it, but sometimes it helps to come back and look at storytelling and what it means and why it's important. So once upon a time, there was an old woman at a coastal city who sat on the beach every night, and she would come out down to the beach and she would sit on a log. And as she sat there, people would begin to gather around her, and they would pull up a bit of sand, a bit of log, maybe bring a lawn chair with them. But before you know it, there would be a circle gathered around her, waiting to see what Lyra had to say. And Lyra would tell stories, most often stories about the sea. So on this one night, she began to tell the story of a sailor who had been lost while he was out at sea and found his way back by listening to the tide and listening most especially to the hush between the tide. Everyone was listening very closely, and when she finished the story, a stranger from the back, one of those strangers who looked like he'd had a really hard life, who had sharp eyes and a bit of a scowl, stepped forward and he said, "Lyra, why do you tell these stories? They don't change the world." And she said, "You're right. They don't change the world. They don't fix anything, but they unfix us. They loosen us up. They soften us. And when we're loose and soft, the heart has the opportunity to change us from the inside out." And he said, "Well, that doesn't do much good." And she said, "It's really not my job. It's really not my job to evaluate the story. It's my job to tell the story. And the story is different every time I tell it because we're different every time we come together. And something always comes through that brings us light." And she handed him the lantern that she carried to the beach every night because it was a long walk home and it was usually dark when she got there. She handed the lantern to him and said, "Would you hold this for a minute?" And he did. And when he did, the palms of his hands got warm and the look on his face softened. And she said, that warmth and that softening, that's why we tell stories. Because something shifts inside of us that allows us to warm up to new ideas. Well, the man wasn't sold, but he still came back. Every night when Lyra came to tell a story, he came back and he sat for a long time at the back. And after a while, the scowl started to soften and the look in his eyes brightened. And one night he even sat next to the other people instead of behind them. And as time passed, the day came that Lyra didn't show up one night. The community knew it was coming. They knew she was getting older. But on that particular night, it was the stranger who stood up and sat on that old log next to the water and picked up the lamp and told a new story. So I share the story with you because the power of a story is that it softens our heart. The power of a story is that it lights us from the inside. It warms us in a new way. A story teaches in a way that we as ministers can't do alone. It's as important to what we offer to our communities as the music is. It brings a different experience, a different way in which we can reach people. And it's never been our job to fix people. It's always been our job to unfix people, to loosen their grip on what they believe is true enough that they actually give consideration to what they believe to be true. And it's never our job to make that decision for them either. But when they feel warmed and they feel the light that is present, something in them shifts. And that is the only thing we're there to do. So stories open the heart. They build bridges and they awaken memory and meaning. They bring to us an awareness of what it is to be human in a way that people can't help but listen to. If they feel like we're just talking at them, it's easy to tune out and think about what's going on with the rest of their life. But when we tell a story, they don't want to miss a word because we're trained to listen. We've been trained to listen to stories since we were little children. So incorporating stories in what we do is really important. And the minister, as a storyteller, it's one of the greatest compliments someone can give you, is to say, I love to hear you because you're a great storyteller. You carry wisdom that is alive, wisdom that is passed from generation to generation. And the stories that you tell may change, just like Lyra's stories did, because we need different things out of our stories at different times. But those stories anchor spiritual principles in a way that words alone can't do. Every narrative that we use opens a doorway to a new kind of connection. And even when people feel crunchy and irritated and uncertain, a story has a way of reaching into their heart. So it's important for us to consider how we use stories. And there are a lot of different types of stories that we can use when we're speaking. We have personal stories, and most of us incorporate those judiciously, because there's only so much that we want to share. But we all also know that our authentic willingness to be vulnerable and share our personal stories often softens people in a way that nothing else does, because we take ourselves off the pedestal and we become very human in our own stories. We become approachable and real. And when we say we figured out how to handle a problem, we're more believable when we share what the actual problem was for us and how hard it was for us to learn. So there's a difference between I have a music director who says you don't bleed on the stage. When you sing, you don't bleed on the stage. You sing and you give feeling to it. The same is true when we tell our personal stories. We don't bleed on the stage, because the point of the story is not how tragic our life was or how difficult. The point of the story is what we learned through the difficult moments of our life. And we put more focus and emphasis on that than on the difficulties. But we share enough of the difficulty for people to really understand that it was real and that we were there. We had to overcome something, just like they do. Community stories are really fun. Remember when we did this? Remember when that happened? Remember when so-and-so was still here? Remember when, remember. Pull together what was and bring it into membering, into connection, into wholeness. We use the stories of our community to pull parts of ourselves back in. If you've moved out of a building, moving back to conversation about, remember when we had this building, and remember when we gathered at this time and how sweet those moments are. And also remember how we made the decision to move into a different place. That can pull the past into the present and open the door for the future so that we have a continuous stream of being as a community. Mythic and archetypal stories are always valuable. I like Indigenous cultural stories because Indigenous stories have lots of animal characters, and they tell us things like how the moon was born and how the sun was born and how Coyote became funny and all of those kinds of things. They're a simple lesson. Parables and Psalms also simple lessons, but powerful metaphors for the experiences that we have in life. And then transformational stories are stories that people have shared with us about how they transformed from one place to another. Sometimes there are things that we've seen people move through. Sometimes there's something someone has shared with us. Obviously, we have to be careful, and we'll talk about that when we're telling other people's stories. We have to be careful what we tell and whether we tell it at all. But there are transformational stories that are really valuable when we're able to say, I knew this person who. I knew someone who actually went from this place to this place, because it opens up the world to possibility. It takes something. When we tell the story of the 4-minute mile, that's a transformational story. Up until the first person ran the 4-minute mile, it hadn't been done. It wasn't possible. But when the first person ran the 4-minute mile, very soon after, more people were running a 4-minute mile, because transformation happens when possibility becomes real. So telling stories of transformation can open the doorway for our communities and our members, our participants, to see themselves in a new world of possibility. How do we tell a story? There are some main components in the anatomy of a story. A powerful story always has a moment of tension. It has an introduction that makes you feel bought in. It's colorful. It tells you something. Lyra sat by the sea. We now know where she is. We can see her. We know she's sitting at the ocean front. We can almost feel the breeze. We can see the people slowly gathering from the city. And then a stranger comes up, a moment of tension. Who's this guy? This crabby guy who just came up. Who is this guy and why is he here? And even more tension when he challenges her. Why do you tell these stories? They don't change the world. Well, right, they don't. But they loosen us, they unfix us, they open us, they warm us. This is a shift in perspective, because we can all relate to the perspective of that doesn't change the world, and yet it does change something. So a story has a shift in perspective, a truth that's told, and a blessing or an insight that you can take home with you. And I like a blessing or an insight that I can come back to later in the service. So if I were to speak about something that warms you, or something that softens you, or something that unfixes you, or something that allows you into new possibility, then I might say that again in my closing prayer. Let us be unfixed. Let us find the warmth inside ourselves. Let us listen to the stories long enough that we soften and join in and begin to discover the stories that belong to us, that are our stories to tell. When you involve a story, you have a touchstone that you can come back to later in the service and pull that thread all the way through, which gives you a nice feeling of continuity from the beginning of your service through. One of the things I really like to talk about is the difference between showing and telling. So when I explained to you that Lyra is an old woman who sits on a log at the beachfront, it gives you a picture. It tells you, it allows your mind to open up. If I just said there was once an old woman who was a storyteller, you would miss that. You would miss the picture that developed in your mind. So it's important for us to use sensory details to talk about how the wind blows, to talk about the scowl on the man's face, to talk about the fact that he picked up the lantern and it warmed his hands. Because those feeling words, those sensory words, give us a different level of communication that moves through our body. I picked this particular picture because this is a grandma picture, isn't it? This is a warm, soft grandma holding a little one and laughing and playing, and you can feel that. You can feel the understanding of that because there's an image in front of you. When we tell stories, we are the emotional guide for the story, and we help steer the feelings that people have by giving them showing words instead of just telling them what's happening. So you can improve your story by working on your showing words. And finding stories is always a big deal. Where are we going to find stories? Moments of awe are good stories. Anything that makes you go, oh. So recently we had, maybe you saw it where you were, we had the Aurora Borealis come down into Colorado where I am. And I was so excited to see it. My son said to me, there is a glow. There's a red glow outside. There might be a fire. So I ran to the back window to see, and then I could see the glow, but it was really high. And so I went out my front door and around the side of my house, and it took me that much time to realize I was looking at the Aurora Borealis. And so I ran back in the house and grabbed my husband and said, "Come on, we have to go." And we drove to a place called Garden of the Gods, which is this amazing place of red rock, hills and valleys and mountains. It's a lot like Sedona. Most of us are familiar with Sedona. And there are these beautiful places where the mountains dip into valleys. And I went and parked the car by one so that I could get out and capture a picture of that light in that valley between the mountains. And I got some amazing, amazing shots. And as I was sitting there, I was so caught in the wonder of what we rarely see in the world, the light in the sky, that light that came all the way to the sun that reminds us that there is so much more than what we really know moving through us, because that light of the sun is moving to us every day, isn't it? It's always there. On this particular day, we could see something more. That's a moment of awe. That story I can use to talk about the light of the holy that is always present, and about how amazing it was to see it, and how sometimes we see God reveal itself to us in ways that are really tangible and physical, and other times we don't. Other times we don't have that. We have faith, we have awareness, we have presence. So moments of awe are fabulous for bringing into your conversation a spiritual metaphor that helps to teach a particular principle. Moments of struggle. When something goes wrong, I have a flat tire. I was on my way somewhere the other day and I had a flat tire, and I had to call my husband to come and help me because I was on the side of the freeway, and you know how the traffic whooshes by so fast. And I was so both afraid of being there and also afraid for him, because he had to pull across lanes of traffic to get to me. And it was one of those places where the traffic comes in and the traffic goes across. And I was on the side of the road right there. Sometimes life is full of struggle. Sometimes our struggle bleeds over to other people. And we don't know whether to be worried about ourselves or worried about someone else. But the struggle is real in life, and it can be as simple as a flat tire, right? So again, how do we pull a story of struggle in? Really easy to pull something that people can relate to. Moments of revelation we all have, moments that something comes up in us and it's so exciting that we can't help but bring it forward. And moments of humor are planned a lot of times. We think about the line we're going to use. Sometimes it comes out by accident. Sometimes we just open our mouth and something funny comes out. Or sometimes, maybe this has happened to you, sometimes your community will find something funny in something you said that you never thought was funny at all. but the way you said it or what they heard versus what you thought you were saying can be really funny. Moments of humor are punctuation points. When people have to pause and laugh, it's a punctuation point. Stay there. It's a period or an exclamation, or maybe even a question. But humor is a punctuation point to stop and honor and give people the time to have their laugh. And then they'll be ready. If you start too soon, you cut off their laugh. And they want to have their laugh. They want to be in the funny part. So give them a minute for it and then move forward. You can find stories on Google by just Googling short stories. Short stories about eyesight, short stories about opening to the truth, short stories about anything, whatever it is that you're speaking on. You can Google short stories and a bunch of stories will come up. And then you have to pull a story, read it out loud, see if it feels like you, see if you have to alter the story to make it work or if the story works well. Parable cones and mythology, all of those are great ready-made story. When we talk about Jesus and cursing the fig tree, it's a great ready-made story. The story is there. This is what happened. Can you imagine? What does that mean to you? Your life experience, the stories you love, the movies you watched, the people you know, the things that have grown you, all of those are real and valuable as long as it doesn't become about you. If the story is always about you and your life and not about how what occurred affects their life, then you've lost your way. Our stories must always bring people to their own lives, to their own hearts, to their own understanding of their life experience and the value of their own experience. And you can bring a storybook in. A lot of us have kids who come in. And so we sometimes will read a story to the kids when they come in. Sometimes we let the kids talk, and sometimes we say, sit down here on the platform. I have a story for you today. And we can tell that story. And when the kids leave, we can pull that child story into the adult world. I was watching the other day, I was watching a little movie of a storybook called The Sneetches. And the Sneetches one has a star belly and one has a moon belly, and the star belly Sneetches and the moon belly Sneetches never come together because both of them think they're better than the other. And so it's a great story to tell to kids, a wonderful lesson for children, but also a really important and easy lesson to tie into an adult teaching around how we look at each other, especially in today's world where there's so much judgment and so much concern about difference, how we recognize what it is to be human. So storybooks are really valuable. And jokes, sometimes a joke can be broken down. Don't be afraid to write your own story. Don't be afraid to hear a joke or a punchline and sit down and put together the story around it, because the punchline is important, because the punchline you can use, or something happens and you can create. These stories give new life to what we're doing and allow us to move beyond the regular picture of who we are, allow us to move into something that is warmer and softer and more approachable about life. Metaphor is the value of story. How do you tie this story into something new? I like to often use the mythology. There's a story called The Descent of Inanna, and Inanna goes into the underworld and she has to go down many stairs. And at every stair, she has to leave a part of herself, her crown, her robe, her jewelry. She has to leave behind to go into the underworld. And that's a really good metaphor for what happens in our lives, that we have to leave all the things that we've dressed ourselves in to go into the richness of what is in the interior of us. We have to forget who we think we are and become who we really are, to look at the inside. So metaphor is a great bridge. Symbols can be used, and our experience as a teacher. All of these things help us to bring forward a story that really touches people's hearts, or their funny bone, or their aha. Oh, wait a minute, aha. There was something interesting in that story, and I want to know more about it. In pastoral care, stories can soften some of the hard things that we need to say. Do you have a good story about loving someone else? It can be your own story, or it can be someone else's story, or it can be a real story, an actual story. But how do you talk about softening the hard places? How do you give opening for deeper conversation? And how do you help people to feel really seen as who they are? I think so often pastoral counseling, in part, is about normalizing the difficult challenges that people face, because we see those challenges over and over, and we know that these are normal things. This is a normal part of aging. This is a normal part of parenting. This is a normal part of a love relationship. This is a normal part of working and challenging who you are. We see all of that because we have the ability to talk to many people. But a lot of people are so wrapped up in what's happening in their own world that they think they are the only ones having an experience. And when we share a story about other people who have experiences, we open them to a more more acceptance of the fact that life experiences kind of happen across the board to all of us. And a lot of them are really similar and very normal at certain ages and stages of life. Stories will weave community together. When we share the story of when we were back in the old building, people who were never there begin to connect to the fact that there's history behind this community. These narratives help them to belong because they now know what the story is. Even if they weren't there, it's not a story outside of them. They've been brought into the story and they've learned about it, and they feel like they're connected to what's happening. And they remind us that we're part of what is alive. We are human, and that human experience happens in the jungles of Africa and on the beach where Lyra was sitting and in the forest of the mountains and in the deserts. Human stories happen, and the scenery might change, but the humanness is the same. The human experience and the human condition is very much the same. We have different levels and different ways of perceiving things. But I can say to you, I'm tempted at that statement to say, oh no, Ariana, it's really different for people in Africa than it is in the United States. It's really, really different there. It's hard in Africa. They don't have everything they need. Boy, I would tell you, having been there, my observation is that people in Africa were much happier than people in the United States. They may not have had all the things that we have, but the level of happiness and connection and kind of understanding of the relevance of what really matters is so present in that culture. So sometimes telling these stories from different parts of the world remind us that there's more to life than the conditions that we are accustomed to ourselves. There are ethics for storytellers. We have to honor confidentiality. Not every story is for retell. Some stories we can freely tell. Some stories we're told we can tell. And some stories we can tell in a way that doesn't name anybody and shift a story of something that we've learned about or experienced in a way that doesn't expose anyone. It's important to honor confidentiality and to really know the stories that you can never tell, because there are some. There are some stories that even if you change the names, they're so specific that they would expose someone. And it is their story to tell and not ours. So honoring confidentiality is important. If we want to tell someone's story and it's possible to gain consent to just ask, I won't use your name, but this is such a great story. It would be such a powerful teaching, and I'd love to offer it sometime. To ask consent when you're able is a really good thing. And to tell the truth without causing harm. So I might say, I had a really bad day with my husband yesterday. We had a huge fight when I started the morning. That's fine. Mark would acknowledge that too and say, yeah, we had a terrible fight yesterday morning. But to go into the details of that and say, Mark did this and he did that, and I was mad for this and he said that, is to cause harm, because that's our private story. That isn't for anyone else. It's okay to be human in our stories, and also important to be sure that we're being truthful without causing harm. So I want you to take a moment and to recall a moment when Spirit surprised you. To just recall a moment when you saw Spirit, like I saw the aurora borealis, was unexpected and so present that I couldn't deny it. When is a time that the light was there for you? Think about where you were when that happened. Think about what changed in you in that moment. Because when Spirit shows up, something changes in us, something remarkable changes. And just hold that memory. That is a story that belongs to you, a story of the truth of Spirit, a story of the truth of how Spirit has been present in your life. Have you shared that story? Could you share that story? When and how? What are the sensory pieces of that story? Where you were, what it looked like, what it felt like, how it felt to your heart, how it felt in your body to recognize Spirit. What happened for you in that moment, what you learned. Just gently open your eyes and remember that and hold that story because it's an important story for you and there is a place for it. There is a place either in your writings, in your journaling, or perhaps in an upcoming lesson where your story can help people to understand how present the Holy really is. So we integrate our stories into our ministry, in our sermons, in our lessons, in our classes, in our ceremonies, if you're doing ceremony, sometimes in our pastoral visits, and often in our leadership conversations. Our leadership conversations are so much richer when we invite stories of success, stories of growth, stories of challenge, stories of acceptance, stories of blessing. All of those things help our staff and our volunteers, people who are leading, to lead better. As you think about all of this, I wish you these things. I wish that your stories carry light. I hold for you that vision that when you tell your stories, the light of your story shines through freely, that your voice actually does soften and unfix people and open the world. And I offer you that every tale you bring someone home, home to their heart, home to their spirit, home to their inner knowing. I offer you those awarenesses. And I offer you one last thing, and that is that you take on the name storyteller, that you actually understand that to be a minister involves storytelling, that you become a storyteller, that you consider what it means to be a storyteller. And that when you tell your story well, that just like Lyra, the stories become so important then that when you can no longer tell the stories, someone will come and take your chair. Someone will come to tell stories in your place because the stories are such a rich and profound and important part of who we are and what we do in the world and how we as human beings experience what it is to be human. It is always my great pleasure to be with you, to share a little time. Next month, we'll be talking about planning your whole next year. If you're interested in some stories, let me know. I'm happy to send you some. I'm a collector of stories. I have a lot of them. If you want to talk about stories, stick around. We're going to end this recording, and I am going to hold this space open so that we can have additional conversation. And I look forward to seeing those of you who have to go next month. I look forward to spending more time with you, and I'm so grateful for the amazing work that you do in the world. We are incredibly blessed to have this job, to do this work, to share our stories, to touch people's hearts, and to soften and loosen things so that the world can shift on its own. I'll see you soon.